Welcome to the Own It Powercast, the place to be when you get serious about making big changes and accelerating growth in your life and in your relationships. Finally create the life you've always wanted, living life on your own terms. Learn how to take your fear and turn it into powerful choices that will create sustained change. Now your host, Mary Baker.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Own It Powercast, a place where you can come to get what you need to move yourself forward. Hey, it's Mary Baker, and welcome to episode 64, The Roots of Anxiety. So I thought September would be a good month to focus on something that's happening for probably every one of us right now and for the past 6 months, right? Given the pandemic, given all of the stress out there in the world, I thought it would be a good time to focus on anxiety this month, where it comes from, what the different kinds of anxiety are, and most importantly, how can we cope and manage it and so it doesn't run our life. Before we get started, I just want to put a shout out to those of you who gave me some really great feedback on our last episode with Sonia Thompson-Halsey about finding the real you on the journey, and I just love that concept, and I think about how this whole podcast, all of the episodes are all about the journey, aren't they? And the journey continues, and there's so many facets to it. So thank you for all of you who are sharing the message and sharing the podcast and learning and growing from it, because that's why it's here. That's why we are here. We are all here to support one another. And I want you to hold on to that thought as we walk through this concept of anxiety this month. A lot of this you're already going to know, but I just want to refresh, what are some of the symptoms of anxiety? And I also want to note here, every one of us is different. So just because you may be having some symptoms that aren't on this list, don't write them off. Honor them. They're yours. Anxiety is sneaky too, guys, and I think that it can show up in so many crazy ways that you would not connect the dots immediately. Okay, so the first obvious one is feeling nervous, restless, tense, on edge. You want to climb out of your skin. It's hard to sit still. Fear, right? Anxiety is all about fear. It's all fear-based, so worrying about danger, worrying about impending doom, worrying about what's going to happen in the next hour, the next day, next year. Can it be okay? Will it be okay? Will I be okay? I mean, that's ultimately what we're concerned about. Having an increased heart rate. People get to the point of panic where they're hyperventilating. They can't breathe. They're shallow breathing. I mean, some people shallow breathe as a norm because they have so much trauma and anxiety growing up that's kind of their normal way of operating. And it's harder for those folks to sit and meditate and deep breathe and relax all of their muscles. So trembling, okay, when it gets really bad. Feeling weak or tired. I mean, anxiety is exhausting. And those of you who struggle with it know exactly what I'm talking about. The other thing is having difficulty focusing and concentrating. There's two things I want to say about this. One of them is the belief is that cortisol washes back and forth over our brain and kind of wipes out our short-term memory. Do you ever notice when you're having a really stressful day? I know this is true for me where I can't remember anything. Short-term, like why I walked in the room, what was I coming in here for, and what was I supposed to write down 5 minutes ago? It's hard not to feel distracted and all over the place and struggling to focus and remember. Except for, here's the other part, the one thing you can't not focus on, right? Which is that damn worry. Now that's a control issue, okay? And we're going to talk about control this month. I mention it here and there across the episodes because it's a big deal. But focusing on the present worry, it's like it's taking up your entire radar and you can't get it off of there. Trouble sleeping is a big one that most people report. Can't relax. Can't fall asleep because you're ruminating. You go down 52,000 rabbit trails. You know what I mean? What we're doing is we're trying to control stuff in our head, right? We can't let go and let it be and rest. Early waking up really early for waking up in the middle of the night after maybe falling asleep for an hour or two, then having a hard time getting back to sleep. And here's the thing. that's a compounding issue, because then you feel so stressed out and anxious and tired the next day because your body's struggling now. You have not gotten the rest that you need to replenish and to feel calmer. GI issues. GI issues are directly tied to anxiety, I think. I also think they're tied to some other things that we'll get into this month. But having GI problems, irritable bowel syndrome, all kinds of stuff for people. Nausea, I think, is a symptom that's not often talked about, I think, but a lot of people report it when they're feeling really anxious, they're feeling really green. And avoidance, wanting to avoid things that trigger your anxiety. Now, that's a symptom of PTSD. Remember, like we've been talking about, PTSD doesn't have to be a huge event that just happened to you. I call it low-level PTSD. It's like you're not freaking out, but you're not calm either. You're kind of functioning, but it's there. So these are some of the symptoms, and I'm sure you probably have more, and embrace them. Everyone is different, and yet some of this is also universal. It's one and the same. So what are some of the causes of anxiety? Now, this is going to be controversial because, number one, I'm not going to cover everything in this episode. And number two, I'm not going to make it extremely clinical either. I think we want to look at behavioral. So that's where I split with some folks on this, and that's okay. But there are some medical culprits here that you may not realize that cause anxiety. Heart disease and diabetes, thyroid issues like hyperthyroidism can increase anxiety. So can hormonal changes, especially for women. That can really cause anxiety. So that's something to look at. COPD or asthma because someone already has a hard time breathing, and then the compounding anxiety like, oh crap, I can't breathe, and that makes me more anxious, and then it makes it harder to breathe, and so on and so forth. Some medications, chronic pain, and rare tumors. So there's that. There are some medically induced anxiety symptoms that you want to think about. In mental health, the rule of thumb is you always rule out medical first. You rule that out, make sure that's not the case. Then that leaves us with, the educated guess that it's probably emotional and behavioral. So here are some things that I think are also emotional and behavioral culprits that are very important to look at. This is based on years of sitting with people, talking with people, training that I've had, my own experiences, and just kind of gathering the information. So the first one, and a big one, is lack of boundaries. Now, if you're not familiar with the ins and outs of boundaries, I encourage you to go back to the early episodes. We did like 8 sessions on boundaries to familiarize yourself, or go back and refresh, right? So I'm not going to get all into that here. But what I do want to say is that a lack of boundaries is I'm not setting limits around things. I'm not saying no to people. I'm not setting limits on how much time I have for something, saying no to myself, not putting boundaries around my time and energy for my self-care, to drop something, to stop obsessing about it, to take care of my needs. Because my argument is if you're not taking care of yourself appropriately in all those ways, like self-care, saying no, being realistic about how much time you have to get stuff done today, detaching and letting go from someone else's no, like someone saying no to you and that being okay. How in the world can you feel safe and have trust is my argument. First, trust in others to honor your needs, right? But more importantly, what about yourself? Can you trust yourself? Can you trust yourself to say, no, I'm sorry, that doesn't work for me? Can you trust yourself to say no to you? No, we're not doing any more work tonight. We need to go to bed. Self-trust, I think, is the cornerstone of self-confidence. We cannot feel confident and grounded and halfway sane if we cannot trust ourselves to take care of ourselves. I think, of course, we need both. We need a modicum of trust, basic trust, and a handful of folks in our life, right? People close to us we can count on, and they are trustworthy people. We've talked about that before. We need some things from them, but man, they're human. We can't outsource all of our trust in them and make them a God in our eyes that can't do wrong and can't be imperfect and always have to be there, because that's pretty dangerous. And that's a lot of pressure on them. Okay, you're going to chase these people out of your life. So we have to have also some self-trust. We need to know that we can handle it. And if I'm not taking care of myself, how in the world am I going to trust myself? If I can't count on myself to say no to you, I'm sorry, I don't have time to do that. Or, hey, I need your help with something. How in the hell am I going to trust me? I'm lying to me and lying to you. And if I'm lying, if there's any dishonesty and disowning, like you've heard me say, there's anxiety. That's my take. The other big piece to this that I talk with clients all the time because I notice it is an internal fight, fighting ourselves, especially when the stakes are high, aka we're going to have to blow something up. There are outcomes that might be difficult. There may be loss. There may be unknown variables. There may be things that could happen that are going to be difficult. So it's like, on one hand, you're like, I know I need to say no to this. On the other hand, but I can't. I'm not ready. I know I need to do this. Crap, I'm not ready. You know, that fight, that internal struggle, that internal battle. Half of you knows the truth. And half of you is not going to feel okay until you confront that issue. You make that change. You say no to that person. You speak truth to power. You do all of those things. And the other half, who is scared and avoidant, is fighting you. And you can't let them win. I have talked to so many people over the years that, funny, but afterward, once they finally had to blow stuff up, they just had to. You know, it just needed to happen. Things came to a head. An opportunity presented itself where it made it easier for them to do it, all that stuff. And weeks later, like, Mary, guess what? I don't have any more anxiety. I'm sitting in a hell of a lot of emotion. I'm sad, I'm mad, I'm disappointed, I'm scared. But I'm not anxious. And that's the thing. They stopped fighting themselves, stood in the truth, had the courage to sit in the grief, because change is lost. And when we confront things, there are going to be emotions. And here's the other thing, dealing with and being able to tolerate other people's emotions, other people being angry at you because you blew something up, because you said no finally, because you walked away, because you stood your ground and you took a risk. So learning how to manage and detach from, right, other people's feelings, that's a big one that keeps people from doing it. And there's all that unearned guilt that we've talked about before. Unearned because you're not responsible for other people's feelings. I mean, this is assuming that when you confront these things, you do this in the healthiest way possible. With I statements, with keeping it about you, with sharing empathy with the other person, saying, I know this is probably difficult. I know you're probably going to hate me for a while, but I need to be honest. I need to be honest with me and honest with you because you deserve that. So assuming we're doing our best, right, to do it in a healthy way, people are still going to be upset and disappointed and pissed. There's been times when you've been upset and disappointed and pissed when other people had to do the same with you. So when we're fighting ourselves, we know we need to do something and we haven't yet. That is a huge source of anxiety. Footnote here, oftentimes we're not even aware of this. We are so disconnected from ourselves. We're so much in la-la land, rationalizing the crap out of things. Oh, no, this is fine. This situation's great, and I'm good, and I'm just focusing on the gratitude here, all that, right? That you're not even aware that you're not happy. You're not even aware, consciously, that something doesn't feel right here, but man, your gut is, your intuition is, and your core self knows damn well things are not okay. Again, this disconnect, this incongruence with self that I keep talking about, that's why it's so important. So if you're having that anxiety, I want you to kind of think about, is it possible that I might be fighting myself and I don't even realize it? Okay. So there's one. Another source of anxiety is when we're focused on trying to control outcomes, right? people, places, and things outside of you, anything that exists outside your skin, circumstances, people, people's choices, the weather, how things are going to turn out. Are you going to be okay? All of that stuff. You know by now all of this is fear-based. And man, is it a surefire way to raise your anxiety. I don't think I've ever really talked to someone with anxiety, especially chronic anxiety, that didn't have control issues. It's a surefire way to raise your anxiety, and my argument is to keep it there. You know, because deep down, you know darn well you have no power to really change those people. You know you can't make it happen. You know you can't change circumstances or life. You can't stop life from coming at you either. So focusing on trying to get things to go the right way, right? Even when we have the best intentions, and most of the time, guys, we do. You know, I've sat with enough people to say most of us have very, very good reasons why we're worried, very good reasons why we want a certain outcome, especially when it involves people we love and care about, especially when the stakes are so high. There are real issues here. There are real consequences if things don't go well. Here's the math that doesn't work. Your fear is that you can't be okay if they don't go well. And damn it, you're probably not going to be okay for a while. You know, when big things happen, that's right. It's going to be awful. And sometimes we want to avoid that at all costs because either we don't think we can handle it or we've had enough in our life. We just don't want no more. Understandable. But here's the thing. You can't be here and feel grounded because you're putting your brain on high alert. You're continually telling your brain, we can't be okay until this outcome happens. You got that? We can't relax. We can't let go. We can't focus. God forbid, laugh and kick back and have some fun. Or focus on the here and now. We can't be emotionally present. Because our fear is if we let go of that, even just trying to let go of thinking about that, for a lot of us is letting go of it, right? There's fear underneath that. If I don't keep some cognitive control over this, it might go badly. Someone's got to worry about this. You know where that comes from, right? Growing up where grown-ups were not grown-ups and didn't worry about the awful things that were happening in your home. See, when you don't have an early template of the right people will take care of things, or maybe they did it first and then they dropped the ball or that was ripped away from you, it's going to be kind of hard to sit back and trust. So focusing on things that you can't control because you lack trust, because you're afraid of being vulnerable again and being let down again. Rather be anxious and disappointed, a lot of people have told me. And it's the opposite of acceptance of what is. So in my mind, it's also kind of like a lack of boundaries, right? It's like I forget where I end and reality begins. So acceptance of what is, and that's kicking and screaming to acceptance, remember, like we've talked about many times. Maybe you have some grief work to do. Drop into some feelings. Early trauma, creating PTSD responses later is a big one. I often sit with people, and it's fascinating because of their survivor skills. They will tell me about childhood like it was the weather, like it was benign. And they're telling me horrific things. They had to disconnect from how god-awful that was to survive. Otherwise, they lose their mind. So I get it. But I also think it's important for you to look back. Some things that you walked through and experienced, you may be surprised, will be labeled a traumatic event because you minimized and you rationalized and you kept it moving. Okay? That's what got you here. But I think it's important to note that because if you want to understand why you have bouts of anxiety, why you have panic attacks, why you can't relax, why you can't sleep, I want you to look back early in life and recognize some of that. And if you haven't worked through that, find a trusted, healthy person or professional to help you walk through that and have lots of compassion. Remember, our brains are there to keep us safe and make us happy. And your subconscious is going to see or feel or think something that is similar to what happened in the past. It's going to think it's the same, and we need to do fight or flight, right? We need to protect ourselves. So we're getting triggered. If it looks like a duck, it must be a duck. And that response is, I'm not safe, I'm not safe, I'm not safe. I can't let go and trust. I have to control. Recent trauma, of course, will do the same thing. What's awful is when people have past trauma and then they have recent trauma. It's a hell of a lot harder for them to heal because you are triggering everything that happened before, even if you've worked on it. It just brings it back up. That's how our brains are wired, guys. They're wired for survival. They're wired to keep us safe. And if it feels like it's danger again, it's danger again. Overwhelming stressors are another category. And these are kind of obvious. But it does us good to kind of sit back and take an inventory like, okay, what's going on? Why might I be feeling this? Big one is health, and that's a big one right now with the pandemic. We've all had to focus on this in one way, shape, or form. Fear for our own health, maybe having had COVID and worked through it, losing people to COVID, being worried about your loved ones who are vulnerable. All the ways that we are limited now with the pandemic. Maybe you have a health condition that is worsening. Maybe there's a scary prognosis. Maybe it's limiting things you used to be able to do. There's lots of grief work around that. Maybe it's your partner or your child or your mom or your sister. The other way this can happen is an accident or surgery. Some of those can be trauma too, remember. Another area is finances. What we do know is chronic financial stress is a big deal. Okay, you can have acute stress and you can have chronic. You can have acute, like, oh my God, the car just died and I don't have money to replace it stress, to chronic, I'm worried every month about paying my bills and things keep happening and I'm on the financial treadmill. That really wears on you, okay? Physically and emotionally. Conflict. When you have lots of conflict in your life, whether it's at work, whether it's in your family and your close relationships, constant conflict is so exhausting and it keeps your brain on high alert. Because remember, a lot of times with conflict, we're in that fight or flight or F it, right? That's what our brains do. Our brains see danger. So if you have like a lot of conflict going on, you're going to have anxiety. So not setting limits is the important thing here, right? On the things we can control. We, of course, cannot control whatever comes flying at us, nor can sometimes you predict. We can only control what we choose. And I don't care how limited your choices are, just focus on those and they will feel like they start to expand. Remember Stephen Covey's circle of influence. If you're not aware of that, go look that up. It's really cool. There's an internal circle, me. Everything I can control, which is just me, right? What I think, what I feel, what I do, what I choose, what I believe. The outer circle is everything outside of me I have no control over. And he said, when I'm focused out there, my internal circle feels like it shrinks, man. And you know this. You feel so disempowered, so victimized, so beat up, and often hopeless, and very, very anxious. He said, if you stop and just force yourself to focus on what can I do today? What can I do today? What am I doing today? How can I change me today? It's so true. It feels like your circle of self actually expands. Acceptance of reality is a big deal with all the things I've talked about today. And again, kicking and screaming, aka grieving to acceptance, right? Then making some decisions. So it's grieve, get to acceptance, no matter how long it takes you. And then, okay, what do I need to do? And, usually if we're doing grief right, our brains will get there. Our brains will want to find a solution. We want to get out of the fight or flight because we can't feel that internal locus of control when we're in that fight or flight. It's really hard. And speaking of feeling, the other two areas are experiencing a loss, either an impending loss of a loved one, a job, a physical ability, maybe unmet needs. We've experienced lots of losses during COVID. Not being able to see your colleagues, your family, your friends, your neighbors, loss of connection, loss of mobility, loss of financial stability, tons of losses here. We are all grieving right now, and we probably will be for a while. But you can't grieve if you're not in touch with what you are feeling. And a big thing I want you to take away from this today is if you're swirling in anxiety, you're not letting yourself have your feelings. You picture like up above your head this swirl, right, of anxiety, all the thinking, the ruminating, the what ifs and the if onlys and all that stuff. You'll stay up there because, ironically, that's a hell of a lot safer, or you think it is, than dropping down into your feelings. And a big one for people is anger. Talking to someone the other day who's really anxious, and I finally looked at her and I said, "So how pissed are you?" And oh my gosh, her face, it clicked. She goes, "I didn't even realize how angry I was." I'm like, "Of course you didn't. That's why you're anxious. You're not letting yourself feel the anger." And we've done several episodes on disowning your anger and why, growing up, why you had to do that. All right. So dropping into and re-owning yourself. Re-owning. Because the disowning, I think, creates a lot of anxiety. And I don't think we can feel and be grounded if we are disconnected from our feelings. I just don't think that is possible. Because they represent you at the core. I think they're interconnected with what you believe and what you think and what you need, what you value. Even if you want to change them later and think they were ridiculous, that's fine, but denying them today never ends well. People who learn how to grieve don't need to have panic attacks. People who finally do some big grieving sleep at night. People who recognize their hurt and vulnerability underneath their anger can breathe and relax finally. Here's the thing, though. You may have learned to cope by denying and stuffing feelings you realized that others were not going to honor. You got the vibe, too. Don't trust or honor what you feel because you've been told it's over the top and it's nonsense, right? Those of you who've been listening for a while just cursed and got pissed off and said, "Whoa, wait a minute, Mary, that's manipulation. That's BS, and no one has the right to tell me what to think or what to feel, or if it's valid." I say, good for you. You get it now. You know better now. Reconnecting with what you feel, and no one has the right to tell you how valid it is. Only you get to decide that. So feeling can feel overwhelming. And here is everyone's big fear, that we will implode or explode, right? Or wind up fetal for days if we put our big toe in that abyss of feeling. So being anxious and staying up in our head and trying to control shit feels safer, right? People get mad at me sometimes when I say that, like, "This is awful, Mary. How can you say anxiety is better?" I'm like, well, it's the devil you know. When we drop into feelings, there is nothing more vulnerable. That is one hell of a surrender. You are not in charge. Grief is its own animal, and deep down we know that. Letting go can be terrifying. That's why if you have grief work to do, if you want to start dropping into some of this, get some structure and some boundaries around that. Don't leave it wide open, like we've talked about before, and get some healthy people around you to bracket that. So you will be less likely to implode or feel like an amoeba, okay? You won't unravel because there's boundaries around it. You get to fall apart during therapy for an hour, during that grief group, with that Zoom call with a friend, and then you glue it back together and you get dinner made, okay? You let the pressure out a little bit at a time. So, as you can see, anxiety can come from a whole bunch of different places, and often we're checking multiple boxes here. So don't think that you have to have one of these discrete things happening today. No, you can have 5 or 6 I feel really bad for you if you do. My hope is that you get some love and support around you if you do. Because you can hit a wall, have a panic attack, a meltdown, or worse, a stroke, right? This can hit you medically. Not good. We want to prevent that. You deserve to have a long life. So there can be also a predisposition to being anxious, right? Genetically. And having control issues early in life because that was modeled for you as well. You can have trauma, instability, dysfunction in the home, trauma that happened later, trauma that happened last week. Either way, though, my hope is that this month we can talk about ways that we can focus on healing, dealing, and changing and grounding ourselves so we can start to feel better, to focus on being here now, to get our power back. That's what we want to do. We can't change what's going on out there, but we can change how grounded we want to try to be. That's what matters. So this week, I hope you take some time just creating awareness and noticing your anxiety. Now, don't focus on the anxiety. I just want you to notice it, okay? Don't feed it. Don't feed it anything. Focus on, oh, wow, that makes sense. No wonder. No wonder because I'm feeling X, because this is happening. I just want you to do the no wonder and validate yourself. Do not be hard on yourself. Do not judge yourself. You need lots of love and acceptance and compassion here. Just try to connect the dots to some possible origins. I think you're actually going to feel less anxious as you do that. Because just by taking this step, it can help because that's within your power, right? Whereas anxiety is when we focus on things we have no control over. And then anxiety itself becomes a big bad animal. It's out to get us. All right. So thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you found this helpful. May you stay grounded, healthy, and safe. Believe in yourself, love yourself, take care of yourself this week. Be good to others whenever you find a moment that you can do so. Be sure to check the show notes at ownitpowercast.com. And if you haven't already, sign up for the newsletter that comes out each Tuesday. You can listen to the episode there. That's where you get the bonus downloads and all the other great news. All right. So pay it forward. Keep loving and focusing on you and things you can control. And I'll see you next time.
We hope you took away some useful insights and tools you could begin using right away. If you did, please leave a positive review and share on your social media. Because could you imagine if everyone in your life really got it together? Remember, own it now, so you can really own it later.